Tonight on Under Investigation.
They just started kicking and they burnt me with cigarette lighters.
Just hit me with whatever they had in their hands.
It was such a ritual. It was...
They hunted in packs and stalked their prey like a blood sport.
The beatings were merciless. Some of them were just absolute animals.
Terrorising the gay community for more than 2 decades.
These are gay hate murders.
But incredibly, in the front line of the thugs were New South Wales police officers.
Beating gay people with aluminium truncheons, and it was done by on-duty police.
Tonight, we'll reveal shocking evidence of an organised campaign of hate with police at its core.
It was coordinated, well rehearsed.
That's why they never came to investigate my assault, because it was them.
In an Under Investigation exclusive, a whistleblower comes forward from inside the force.
It's ugly, it's wrong, it's criminal, and it's done in police uniform.
To thousands of young men, they were the hate police.
I would have no doubt some men were murdered by New South Wales Police Force carrying out activities like that.
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me, former New South Wales Detective Sergeant Steve Page.
You've got these gangs of thugs who are out there bashing you, but you've got the gangs of police that are out there equally as active at those locations.
New South Wales Magistrate Jacqueline Millich.
These were a group of people that were completely disregarded.
Sue Thompson, former New South Wales Police gay client consultant.
My phone would ring all day with people reporting bashings. It was extreme.
And Sydney Morning Herald journalist Rick Fennelly, whose explosive stories revealed the shocking scale of the terror launched against Sydney's gay community.
Guys would be quite openly boasting, saying, we're going to go and bash a couple of fags.
It's the 70s and 80s. And homosexuality is still a crime and by some still despised. Youths with hate in their hearts, often armed with knives, planks of wood, hammers and batons, gathered in gangs. Many are formed at high schools or sporting clubs, seeking out gay men at pickup spots known as beats. Bondi and Mork Park in the city's east and Manly on Sydney's northern beaches.
We had a phenomenon of gay men coming out in huge numbers in a short period between the 70s and 80s. And so that created this honeypot where any gutless group of kids who wanted an easy mark could find it.
In recent months, there's been a big resurgence in gay bashings.
Numerous other assaults on gay men in the park.
Bashed on the head with a heavy blunt object.
Hundreds of gay men were viciously assaulted during Sydney's wave of gay bashings.
Assaults with knives, baseball bats, lumps of iron.
But there were murders too, like the killing of 27-year-old Scott Johnson in 1988.
Pushed to his death from the cliffs at North Head.
Ignored by police for decades. Gay men beaten to death or thrown from cliffs near Bondi and Manly.
The bodies of 2 other men had been found at the bottom of the cliff.
Both were the victims of separate attacks by a so-called gay hate gang.
In the 20 years from 1980 to 2000,
fatally bashed in a Randwick Park,
it's estimated there were up to 80 deaths and hundreds of bashings that went unsolved.
If you're a gay person, it was a frightening time.
Absolutely terribly frightening.
During this critical period, those with me tonight play vital roles in exposing these hate crimes and changing the shameful response by New South Wales Police.
First day, murder on my desk. The murder of Richard Johnson.
33-year-old Richard Johnson was punched and kicked to death after being lured by the teenagers to the toilets on the promise of sex.
In the 1990s, Sue Thompson worked as a direct contact for the gay community to report crimes to New South Wales Police.
Or dealing with problems that come up concerns of the gay and lesbian community.
Many victims of an explosion of violence at the hands of school students. I'm not sure a lot of people will realise that these gangs were made up of young people, young men.
Yeah, mostly young men. Gangs of young men. I mean, when we did stuff in the schools, kids would go, oh, yeah, we go to the cliffs every weekend, go poofter bashing. And it was just like every weekend.
If homosexuality was right, guys can have babies as well. 2 blokes and 2 girls, it's not natural.
I think some of them do deserve it.
And there was a real risk of losing your life to these gay-bashing gangs. Have you got a sense of the numbers who might have been participating in these gangs?
Oh, I think if you were looking just even across Sydney without even thinking about New South Wales, I would say probably thousands. And there were thousands of victims.
Participating not just in bashings, but murders.
Yeah, there would have to be. Oh, it would be naive to say otherwise.
These are young people and already they have hatred in their hearts and they've been indoctrinated in some way. Were you shocked by that?
I must say I was. When Sue exposed me to the school environment and I found out what was going on there, it was absolutely shocking.
A police prosecutor at the time, Jacqueline Milich, was shocked by the level of hatred for gay men that existed within the police force and how rarely it prosecuted gay hate crimes.
I had no idea of the depths of feeling in the constabulary about homosexual crime and dealing with homosexual victims. If you're a gay man, you wouldn't put your head up and say you're a gay man. You were victimised in the community and you felt like you had a system that wasn't even supporting you.
It was seen as an Australian sport in lots of parts of society, for sure. Because even if the cops know they're not going to do anything, because they hate them too.
Steve, did you find that these offences were taking place by gangs because there were no repercussions?
Look, if you look at motive, there's plenty of reasons why. The fact that they were likely to get away with it would have played on their mind.
To our table and the gay community, former New South Wales Police Detective Sergeant Steve Page is a hero. The cop who would finally shine a light on what appeared to be New South Wales police indifference to gay bashings and murders committed with impunity. And the style of beating, though, I mean, it wasn't just going out there and just, giving someone a punch.
The beatings were merciless. They stopped when the offenders were finished, not when the victim was done. Some of them were just absolute animals.
The violence and savagery, including by New South Wales Police, is fuelled by 2 key events. The first is the Gay Solidarity March in Sydney in 1978, which will later become the Gay Mardi Gras. "53 people are arrested, most subjected to very public police brutality and further beatings inside Darlinghurst Police Station. But it doesn't end there. A few days after the march, the Sydney Morning Herald publishes the names of those arrested. To be publicly outed at the time as homosexual would often result in gays being ostracised and victimised.
She said things like homosexuality is sick, and she really emphasised the sickness of the whole thing.
Many of those identified lose their jobs, their housing. Some commit suicide. Then in the early 1980s, the AIDS epidemic hits Australia and the government responds with the now infamous Grim Reaper television advertisement.
At first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS. But now we know every one of us could be devastated by it.
The Grim Reaper was meant to be a dark and frightening illustration of AIDS.
That if not stopped, it could kill more Australians than World War II.
But in the eyes of many, the angel of death represented gay men. Steve, did you hear that Grim Reaper ad did have an impact on those who were bashing?
There's more than a few that I've come across that have got the Grim Reaper tattoo that were involved in gay bashings back in that era. They felt that strong about it. They went out and they've got a permanent tattoo on their body.
So it really branded the community.
Absolutely.
Totally.
19 heterosexual people in this country have got AIDS out of the 1,350 that have got full-blown AIDS in this country.
Don't be nice about it, they're poofters, right? So that's rule number one, no poofters.
It was unsafe. It was just awful. The whole AIDS and Grim Reaper thing had exploded. You know, the only gay people that you saw in movies were villains. Society was just completely geared against gay people.
When the Grim Reaper ad was being aired, Kint Verity was a teenager, young, gay, and terrified by the bashings many he knew had suffered, and the lack of police protection. Then, late one night in Darlinghurst, it happened to him. Tricked into a van by 4 men.
Terror, like this screaming in my brain of like, how am I going to get out of this situation? Then just bracing myself because I knew that it was going to be bad. They just started kicking and they burnt me with cigarette lighters. All the while one of them was driving, and then the driver was saying, "Save some for me, don't finish him off yet." It started sounding really obvious that I wasn't going to make it out, that I was going to die.
Left for dead by a dirt road in Sydney's west, a Good Samaritan truckie took Kint home, where he tried to report his attackers to police.
I went to Cronulla Police Station, which was nearest to where I lived, and I went in and I asked to speak to somebody, and then I waited and I just said, "Look, I've been assaulted," and you know, they just didn't want to get involved, they didn't care. And I ended up just getting scared and running out. There was no empathy or support.
But as we'll reveal, police indifference masked something far worse. It's 1978. Sydney's gay pride sparks deep hatred. The very public brutality against gays by police emboldens violent homophobic gangs.
The beatings were merciless. They stopped when the offenders were finished, not when the victim was done. Some of them were just absolute animals.
By 1989, dozens of gay men have been brutally assaulted in pickup spots called beats. The gangs of thugs responsible call it poofter bashing, words almost as shocking as the savagery. It's a wave of hate crime not witnessed by the city before, but police seem reluctant to investigate. Tonight, we'll reveal why. You're about to hear from a police whistleblower who, after decades of silence, has agreed to tell us what he saw happening 40 years ago.
I'm doing it because I want the people who are victims of this conduct to be validated and for them to have their stories accepted.
Mark Higginbotham is a senior, highly decorated Victorian police officer. But he began his career as a 19-year-old with the New South Wales Police Force. He later left in disgust because of what he personally experienced in the early 1980s.
I was tasked to attend Moore Park with, I think, 6 to 10 other police, multiple vehicles.
Sydney's Moore Park was one of the city's most popular gay beats.
Batons drawn, police walked slowly with increasing speed, crossing the park, and then eventually the lead police were running and ran into the toilets.
A cadet policeman at the time, Mark says he quickly realised he was witnessing organised police bashings of gay men.
Men were running from the toilets and scattering and running away from the police. Eventually I understood that this was beating gay people, and it was beating gay people with aluminium truncheons, and it was done by on-duty uniformed police.
Mark says that although he didn't participate in the violence, he does not absolve himself of his responsibilities.
The people that were there in Moore Park didn't look at me and think, there's a poor boy from the suburbs who's been bullied into attending. They saw a New South Wales police officer with a baton in their hand, and they would have been as terrified of me as anyone else in the group. So I apologise for being part of that.
It is a painful admission, and Mark says he is aware of these police bashings occurring multiple times.
Mark Higginbotham is talking about uniformed police in a gang going out and beating gay men.
Yeah, absolutely horrible. Like, you've got these gangs of thugs who are out there bashing you, but you've got the gangs of police that are out there equally as active at those locations.
I don't know how you feel, Jackie, but it's a fairly shocking thing to hear, isn't it?
Not only is all of that an awful thing to listen to, but what is awful is that there was somebody who was decent and genuine and committed to what he was doing, and he had no one to tell.
But Mark Higginbotham goes further. He claims that not only were there organised bashings of gay men by police, he confirms there were officers who protected others who were also guilty of hate crimes.
He says while on patrol with another officer in 1983, a gay man reported he'd just been bashed. Minutes later, Mark and his partner find and arrest the attacker, who admits his guilt. Mark takes him to Darlinghurst Police Station to charge him.
I was typing up a document that was called a fact sheet when I became aware of the presence of the shift sergeant, senior person in the police station at the time, and he started to scream at me, scream abuse at me. "We don't charge poofter bashers here. What have you done?" And he was enraged, and it overwhelmed me. Like, it overwhelmed me and just made me powerless.
Still, Mark did push the charge through. When the victim, a gay journalist, wrote an article praising Mark, the response was swift and nasty.
I was told that I had brought aggravated shame on the police station because I had not only charged a man with poofter bashing, I'm uncomfortable using the phrase, but that's the way it was described, but it had been reported and people would not work with me. I was labelled a, quote, faggot, and people would overtly announce that they would not work with the faggot.
To our experts, Mark's shocking revelations cannot be ignored.
That takes guts, doesn't it?
Oh, that takes huge courage.
So the importance of a man who he's highly decorated in the Victorian Police now, for him to decide, I have to tell this, that's important, isn't it?
That's hugely important. And the New South Wales Police has to hear that and respond to that, because that is a huge thing to do.
Because he's not alone.
Absolutely not alone, and look, I take my hat off to him. The bravery it would have taken for him to go, this is me, this is what I've done, that's incredible that he's come forward and
there
told that
needs to
story.
be another level of someone who is courageous enough to hear it. This is a great start, but there's got to be an end.
It's the kind of courage Rick Fennelly hopes might inspire other police whistleblowers.
I would have thought that any cop who did know what happened, they'll be watching this program, and when they see Mark Higginbotham, they must say to themselves, really, this guy's gutsy, I've got to be gutsy, it's time for me to be gutsy.
There must be people still in New South Wales Police who I worked with. I mean, there were many, many young people my age, many 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds working at Darlinghurst, and it's not far-fetched to think that people still work there. It was wrong, it was clearly wrong. A bloke with a stick is hitting someone on the head. There's no moral confusion about that. It's ugly, it's wrong, it's criminal, and it's done in police uniform.
Our investigation tonight has revealed horrific allegations of police officers bashing gay men.
It was wrong, it was clearly wrong. There's no moral confusion about that.
Mark Higginbotham, a former officer with New South Wales Police, says he watched organised attacks while on duty in the early 1980s.
It's ugly, it's wrong, it's criminal, and it's done in police uniform.
Now, evidence police bashings were occurring at a new and even more sinister level. It's May 1989.
A gay man named Alan Rosendale is viciously bashed by a group of men in the early hours of the morning near Sydney's Moore Park.
It's a well-known and popular beat where gay men meet up.
I wasn't there 5 minutes at the most, and I heard an Australian accented voice say, "There's one, get him." So I just ran, but I tripped and fell in a gutter. And that's where they caught up to me, and that's where they started to, straight away, just hit me with whatever they had in their hands. I don't know how long it went on for, but the last thing I remember is seeing car lights come towards me. I thought, thank God, someone's seen the bashing, they will stop, I'll be saved.
There was a witness to the assault on Alan Rosendale.
Paul Symes was sitting in his car nearby.
I saw under a streetlight that could be seen very clearly 4 guys, possibly 5, leap out of the car.
Paul watched as the men attacked.
I could just see these guys laying into him. It was a horrifying thing to see because I knew that I couldn't get out of the car. So I thought, well, I'll start my car and shine the headlights on, and they just didn't stop. They were laying into him. And it was such a ritual, you know, like it was...
To Magistrate and former police prosecutor Jacqueline Millage and Steve Page, a former detective sergeant, this attack on Alan Rosendale appears both bold and planned.
There's the headlights, somebody's watching what's going on, and yet they're confident enough to continue doing what they're doing.
It was "there's one, get him, anyone will do." That tells me that it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It didn't feel like it was the first time.
Yeah.
It was coordinated, well-rehearsed, and there for a purpose and in numbers.
So I drove past them and U-turned over the median strip and parked behind their car and wrote the number plate down.
Paul Symes then calls police from a public phone box, reports the crime and, importantly, the licence plate number of the attacker's car. Alan Rosendale doesn't know how he survived.
I woke up in St Vincent's Hospital. I was in emergency. I had a vague recollection of waking up there and thinking, I am alive.
Paul Symes also reported the attack to a gay anti-violence hotline. Weeks later, the New South Wales Police Gay Liaison Team, newly set up to deal with complaints from gay victims, returned his call.
And they said to me, "Oh, the number plate of the car that you reported is actually an unmarked police car."
The admission was a bombshell. Paul says he was asked to come to a meeting with police at the New South Wales head office. Accompanying him was Fred Miller, a former Member of Parliament and, at the time, the New South Wales Police Force's Gay Liaison Officer.
So we arrived at the top of the building and entered into a very mahogany-panelled office, and there was a policeman there with lots of gold braid and, you know, had a fantastic view, and, you know, the office was possibly 20 square metres, maybe bigger. There was room for a couch and coffee table and a desk and chairs and bookcases, so it was a big office.
Based on Paul Symes' account, these are the details we can now establish. The meeting was in the old police headquarters at College Street in Sydney, an office on the 3rd or 4th highest level with a view over the cathedral to the harbour. We've established it must have belonged to a very senior officer who questioned Paul about the weapons he saw used in the attack.
I told him what I saw, just like I'm telling you. He sent his secretary away and she brought into the room a police baton, which I didn't know what a police baton looked like, to be honest. And he said, "Do you think you might have seen this?" And as I saw it shining there in its dull metal, I thought, yes, I think there were police batons.
Then the senior officer at the meeting made another extraordinary admission.
The attackers Paul saw were, he was told, part of an unofficial hooligan squad.
Undercover cops apparently allowed by their superiors to act as brutal vigilantes.
It's confirmed to Paul that these are police. Why would you do that, I wonder?
I think that was genuine. I mean, it came at a time when the police were really looking at themselves in this area.
Oh, look, I was horrified. What I was looking at was a gay hate crime. It was a hate crime committed by one of our, fundamental institutions.
At the time, Alan Rosendale's bashing was never investigated. It was only decades later, when Alan read an article by Rick Fennelly about what Paul Symes had seen and been told, that he discovered his attackers were believed to be police.
When I found out that it was the police who attacked me, I just sat there for 5 minutes and thought, that's why they never came to investigate my assault in 1989, because it was them.
The police gay liaison officer Fred Miller, who accompanied Paul Symes, has since died. But journalist Rick Fennelly has questioned Paul extensively about that critical meeting.
Rick, you trust his story?
Absolutely. He's an absolutely plausible witness with no reason to make anything up.
Steve, do you feel comfortable that what you're hearing is from a man who's telling the truth?
I always look to see what corroboration there is, and I think that we've actually been able to match up a registration number and it comes registered to the police service and describing well, the police headquarters and what it looked like. I've got no doubts that it's true.
Given Paul's detailed account, it's difficult for New South Wales Police to deny the high-level meeting took place. But they've told us that no records of it exist, something Sue Thompson in particular finds deeply suspicious.
Like, for example, anyone attending a meeting in police headquarters, you had to sign into the book in reception, you had to get a visitor pass with a number on it, you had to say what floor you were going to and who you were seeing. You're talking about a secure building. It's not like someone's office block. This is police headquarters with a minister and a commissioner and a helipad on the top. I mean, it's the absence of the records that by police procedure should always have been there. The absence says either they were never recorded or they were removed.
Police also say no records exist of the unmarked police car identified by Paul Symes, and that no records exist proving the crime Paul Symes witnessed was, in fact, the bashing of Alan Rosendale. Former detective Steve Page and journalist Rick Fennelly are convinced police could investigate the case more thoroughly.
Surely a police force, even with the loss of records, even with the loss of rosters, that wanted to spend 2 or 3 weeks finding out who was on duty that night, could cast about and get pretty warm, if not the full story. I really think there is just a reluctance to get to the truth on this.
Steve, if you had this information of an undercover police car, you would seek that out, wouldn't you?
There's 2 steps to solve it, and they couldn't be any easier. One is establishing where that car is attached to, which command, and then 2 is going to that command, and every shift you complete a vehicle diary and you know who's driving that car.
It's a duty book as well.
I would argue that the bashing that I witnessed of Alan Rosendale could easily have been a murder.
Tonight, we're investigating one of the most disgraceful chapters in New South Wales police history.
You've got these gangs of thugs who are out there bashing you, but you've got the gangs of police that are out there equally as active at those locations.
Allegations of undercover police terrorising Sydney's gay community during the 1980s and 90s.
I was horrified. What I was looking at was a gay hate crime committed by one of our fundamental institutions.
A whistleblower has told us of what he says were organised bashings of gay men carried out by groups of uniformed police.
It's wrong, it's criminal, and it's done in police uniform. It was ugly, really, really ugly.
Sydney was in the wave of terrible violence against homosexuals. And there were many lives lost.
Wayne Tonk's last moments alive were horrific.
Bashed on the head with a heavy blunt object,
In the 20 years from 1980 to 2000,
it's believed he was bludgeoned with a tape dispenser,
fatally bashed in a Randwick park.
It's been estimated there could be up to 80 deaths.
Russell's body was found at the base of a cliff near a Tamarama park.
These are gay hate murders.
The 22 confirmed, are they the ones where people have actually indicated that they're gay and they've been bashed?
As gay client consultant with the New South Wales Police Force in the 1990s, Sue Thompson realised these murders had a unique and terrible pattern.
The bodies of 2 other men had been found at the bottom of the cliff.
When I was doing my research on gay hate murders, I had cliffs as a weapon because cliffs was like the perfect weapon. You don't have to carry it with you. You actually attack someone at the location where the weapon's there.
And it's frightening.
It's frightening, terrifying. And I watched 2 of the offenders in one of the Bondi Cliff murders describe, oh yeah, we just heard them over the edge, it was the easiest thing. I just went, yeah, okay. Cliffs are a perfect weapon for that sort of crime.
But as Sue discovered, for decades, police failed gay victims. And it was shown more recently following the death of 27-year-old Scott Johnson.
Pushed to his death from the cliffs at North Head.
The brilliant American mathematician was found dead at the base of a cliff near Manly on December the 8th, 1988. For 20 years, his family fought to have Scott's death investigated as a possible gay hate murder. But police stubbornly refused.
There's still evidence and information that Scott may have suicided. I haven't found anything that completely eliminates that as a possibility.
Finally, after Scott Johnson's family instigated its own investigation, in 2017, an inquest found that he fell after being violently attacked.
I pushed the bloke, you went over the edge.
And in 2020, 49-year-old Scott White was charged with murder.
He punched me, I pushed him, and he went over the edge, and I went to grab him.
White pleaded guilty and was sentenced to a minimum of 8 years jail.
Being able to look him in the eye and that he was looking right back was really important.
For the Johnson family, it was a result after 34 long years. But so many other families were denied a similar justice. Denied not only an official investigation, but even an admission from police that their loved ones had been murdered and not victims of misadventure or suicide. For some of them, then Detective Sergeant Steve Page became their last hope.
Steve, how did you get yourself into a position where you were now re-investigating cases?
I was working at the Paddington Police Station and I received some correspondence, and it was a letter from Kay Warren.
Dear Sir,
in fact, she had previously written dozens of letters.
We know that there is no way he is still alive.
Her son, Ross Warren, a Win television newsreader, had gone missing from Marks Park, a well-known gay beat near Bondi in 1989, and she was begging for her son's case to be resolved.
As it is now 9 years since Ross disappeared, we feel it is time for a coroner's inquest to close the case.
While looking through the cold case file, Steve Page finds Kay Warren's repeated pleas for help. After reading them, he reopens the case.
Started having a look at it, and I did find a report, but it smelled a little bit of being what you would call an arse-covering report. And there was a list of all these police that were involved in the investigation, so I went to them going, well, you had involvement in this matter, you know, are you able to run with it and put it before the coroner? And it was amazing. The responses I was getting was, no, I wasn't involved in it at all. Don't know how my name got on that. I was actually on holidays when that one occurred, no involvement whatsoever. But to the casual reader, you'd look at this report and you go, wow, there's this team that's been formed. They've had a look at this disappearance of Ross. They concluded then and there that he'd fallen to his death accidentally in this reporting, so no foul play was pursued. So that got me started. I thought, enough's enough.
While investigating the Ross Warren case, Steve becomes aware of another death at Marks Park, also in 1989.
In the late 80s, it was a gay hangout and also frequented by a hate group preying on homosexuals.
31-year-old John Russell had a lot to live for. He just inherited a large sum of money and quit his job to move to the country. His battered body is found at the bottom of a Bondi cliff. but police refused to investigate it as a homicide, despite the presence of forensic evidence that suggested it might have been.
What stood out with the John Russell case was there was hair sticking to his hand that didn't appear to be his, and the position of his body at the bottom of the cliffs just didn't ring true to me. So I engaged with a forensic pathologist who's had a look at it and studied plenty of cliff-top falls, and the positioning of the body wasn't consistent, with a forwards motion jump. It looked like he'd been
In fact,
pushed.
he was facing the cliff inward, wasn't he?
Yeah, it looked more consistent with getting pushed off backwards.
Basic policing practices ignored. Steve even discovered that the hair in John Russell's hand, potentially vital DNA identification of the killer, had been lost by police.
Are you starting to get a little bit of a sick feeling in your stomach?
Oh, look, absolutely. You had all these incidents that were occurring, the dots weren't joined, the investigations left a lot to be desired, and it was almost starting from scratch. But the problem was, some of them I didn't have bodies, I didn't have crime scenes, I didn't have witnesses.
Police staged a reenactment of Mr. Russell's death.
Steve's investigation becomes Operation Taradale.
Okay, go.
Examining the deaths not only of Ross Warren and John Russell, but Giles Mataney, who vanished in 1985 near where Ross and John had last been seen alive. In 2005, Steve Page's work leads to an inquest. Jacqueline Millage, who had been a police prosecutor, was now the state's senior deputy coroner. Her conclusions at the coronial inquiry are damning for New South Wales Police.
In my finding, I said to describe the other investigations as an investigation would be to give it a label that it does not deserve.
Warren and Russell, she decided, were victims of gay hate crimes. She could not be definitive about Giles Mataney, whose body was never found. For Steve Page and the families who'd put their trust and hope in him, it was a vindication.
Are you fearful that there are many more cases that we just don't know about?
Well, I've got 4 cases that I was able to find that were written off as suicides, accidental deaths, or just left as missing persons, that looking back at it were murder. So how many more are there?
Tonight, we've revealed compelling evidence that New South Wales Police played a direct and shameful role in the wave of hate crimes that terrorised Sydney in the 1980s and 90s.
The hoodlum patrols, they would go into the beats, shine their torches, menace. It was a bit of sport.
Admissions that it was a squad of plainclothes police who viciously bashed Alan Rosendale in 1989.
It was coordinated, well rehearsed.
It was such a ritual. It was...
And claims that police at the highest level knew the truth.
They said to me, oh, the number plate of the car that you reported is actually an unmarked police car.
After eyewitness Paul Symes, who watched in horror, reported the crime.
Clearly they knew who was involved in this attack.
And from our experts.
To be gay back in that era and, just not knowing who was there, to support you.
Former Detective Sergeant Steve Page, former Senior Deputy State Coroner Jacqueline Millage, and the then gay and lesbian client consultant for the New South Wales Police, Sue Thompson, intimate knowledge that bashings and even murders were not properly investigated.
To describe the other investigations as an investigation would be to give it a label that it does not deserve.
And in his first television interview, former New South Wales police officer Mark Higginbotham's eyewitness account of gay bashings organised and carried out by police.
This was beating gay people, and it was beating gay people with aluminium truncheons, and it was done by on-duty uniformed police.
In April, the New South Wales Government announced a judicial commission of inquiry into gay murders from 1970 to 2010. The inquiry will only look at murders. Bashings will not be investigated, which means men like Alan Rosendale, Kint Verity and hundreds of other victims will not have a voice.
They burnt me with cigarette lighters. All the while one of them was driving, and then the driver was saying, save some for me, don't finish him off yet.
Men who faced torment and torture, but who were ignored by police.
I don't know what taking accountability would look like, but, you know, it would definitely look like senior police laying everything out on the table and saying, yes, this is the culture of the time, this is what happened, we are deeply, deeply sorry for anybody. You know, there's hundreds of stories like mine. Like mine's, it's not unique.
Where the rotunda is basically where the action's happening.
And for those bashings alleged to have been carried out by New South Wales police officers...
Dropped down onto South Downing Street, bolted through here, and you saw me fall.
Like the attack on Alan Rosendale, there must also be justice.
This is a case that can be broken. I just don't believe it's impossible to get to the truth. My feeling is that at least a dozen people need to have some knowledge of this story, perhaps more. And I would just say to any of them, this is a man who's lived with this bashing for all of these years, for decades. Come forward, let us know, ring me, ring Under Investigation, ring the police. But really, if you know what happened here, you know, let's get on with it.
Regarding the people that perpetrated that attack, what makes me sleep at night now is knowing that they'll be watching interviews like this and they'll be thinking the net is drawing in around us. That gives me some comfort. They need to be called to account.
Instead of the judicial inquiry, our experts are calling for nothing less than a royal commission, so that the assaults as well as murders of gay men and the role of police can be properly examined.
It would be interesting if there was a royal commission and they looked at bashings and not simply just at deaths. It may be something that can allow us to get closer to the truth.
And if you don't look at the assaults, how can you understand the murders? The assaults are the foundations for the murders. Otherwise, you're just cherry-picking what's on the top. You don't understand, you know,
not to
the whole
mention that the
foundations.
people who committed assaults may well be the guy who murdered the guy down the street.
Totally.
I mean,
but it's also, I think it's time for these men to have a voice.
A royal commission would do that.
Yeah. And you might get police that were involved in all of this in the past willing to come forward and testify.
I can't be the only person who saw it as reprehensible. That's just not possible.
Mark Higginbotham is the first former New South Wales police officer to speak publicly about the alleged crimes and cover-ups committed by police and their alleged protection of perpetrators. Now he challenges others to come forward.
35,000 people have been employed by New South Wales Police since I was employed, and I wonder how many of those 35,000 were exposed to events that they saw as ugly. And I left in disgust eventually, and I wonder how many other people have done the same.
Despite the passage of time, gay hate killers and bashers remain among us. They are criminals who have eluded justice for decades. And of course, if you have information, including about the attack on Alan Rosendale or the high-level police meeting Paul Symes says he attended, we'd like to hear from you. You can contact us on our email, underinvestigation@nine.com.au. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining me, and I thank you. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Hello, I'm Liz Hayes, and thank you for watching Under Investigation. Subscribe to our channel now for exclusive clips, and don't miss out on full episodes of Under Investigation on 9Now and the 9Now app.